The relentless waters of the North Atlantic hold secrets that time rarely dares to reveal, and none is as disturbing as what happened in December 1900 on the Flannan Isles. Imagine an isolated rock, whipped by winds that seemed to whisper ancient names, where the only light of hope was the Eilean Mor Lighthouse. 3 experienced men, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, formed the garrison responsible for guiding ships through the darkness. They were men of routine, forged by solitude and the rigorous discipline required by the Northern Lighthouse Board. However, something broke that order. On December 15th, the ship Arcta reported that the lighthouse light was out, an unthinkable error for keepers of that caliber. When the relief team finally managed to land days later, what they found was not a scene of obvious disaster, but a picture of absence, so absolute it defied logic. The main door was locked, the raincoats hung on their pegs, and the dinner table displayed the remains of an interrupted meal, as if time itself had decided to stop and consume those men in a single breath of mist. The initial investigation, led by Robert Muirhead, delved into a diary that narrated increasingly strange events in the days leading up to the disappearance. Thomas Marshall wrote about severe storms, the worst he had seen in his career, describing an uncharacteristically quiet James Duckett and a Donald MacArthur weeping convulsively. The detail that makes this record chilling is that, according to meteorological records from nearby ships and coastal stations, the sky was clear and the sea was calm during the period mentioned in the diary. How could 3 veterans report an apocalyptic storm, while the rest of the world saw only calm? This discrepancy suggests that the storm terrifying them must not have been climatic, but something psychological, or perhaps a localized anomaly that the science of the time could not catalogue. The diary ended with a phrase that echoes in the halls of maritime history to this day: "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." These were the last words recorded before absolute silence took over the island of Eilean Mor, leaving behind only unanswered questions. Upon exploring the island, the search team noted severe damage to the west landing platform, more than 30 meters above sea level. Iron railings were twisted and a gigantic rock had been moved, suggesting a hydraulic force of unimaginable proportions. The official theory accepted by the authorities is that a rogue wave had hit the island unexpectedly. According to this line of reasoning, 2 of the guards would have been trying to secure equipment on the platform, while the third, violating rules to try and help them in a moment of panic, would have been swept along with his companions into the depths of the ocean. It is a rational and technically possible explanation, given the unpredictable behavior of the Atlantic. However, it fails to explain why the raincoats remained inside the lighthouse, why the door was locked, and most importantly, why such experienced men would ignore all safety protocols to face a wave of that magnitude without proper protective gear, the lighthouse vulnerable and dark in the desperate rescue process. Beyond geological explanations, local folklore offers a much darker and more spiritual perspective on the incident. The Flannan Isles were known by locals as the Seven Hunters, a place considered sacred and dangerous, where the supernatural seemed to have permission to walk freely. Legends said that ancient creatures inhabited the rocks, and that any prolonged human intrusion would be punished. Many fishermen avoided staying overnight there, fearing that the spirits of the island's ancient inhabitants would claim their souls. Although modern skepticism dismisses these stories as mere sailor superstition, the atmosphere of Eilean Mor after the disappearance was so heavy that new lighthouse keepers frequently requested transfers, reporting voices in the wind and the constant feeling of being watched by invisible eyes. For the inhabitants of the Hebrides, the 3 men were not taken by the sea, but rather claimed by something that the modern architecture of the lighthouse was unable to keep outside, transforming the building into a monument to the unknown. Modern science has attempted to revisit the case using fluid dynamics simulations and advanced climate models to understand if a freak wave could truly have caused such devastation. Experts suggest that the unique geometry of the Eilean Mor cliffs can create an amplification effect, where smaller waves combine to form a vertical and destructive wall of water. That even mathematical precision stumbles upon human nature. The behavior of the keepers remains the greatest enigma. If one of them had fallen, would the others have jumped into danger or followed their survival training? The absence of bodies is common in shipwrecks, but on a solid island, the lack of any physical trace, a cap, a boot, a fragment of clothing, fuels theories that something more complex occurred. Document forensic analysts have also raised doubts about the authenticity of Marshall's diary entries, suggesting that the melancholy and religious tone have been a later fabrication to increase the drama of the story, adding a layer of fraud or confusion to the enduring mystery. If it wasn't a wave, and if the diary is questionable, what remains is the scenario of a collective psychotic break triggered by extreme isolation. Cabin fever is a documented condition where individuals confined in small spaces under great stress lose contact with reality. In an environment of howling winds and absolute solitude, a banal argument could have escalated into a tragedy. Perhaps one of the men became violent, leading the others on a fatal chase across the slippery cliffs, culminating in a collective fall into the abyss. This theory would explain the suggested psychological disorder, but it again stumbles on the fact that the three were veterans with years of impeccable service and resilience tests implicit in their careers. The idea that three disciplined professionals would simultaneously succumb to madness seems as statistically unlikely as myths of sea monsters, leaving us in a limbo between crime, accident, and the impossible, where every single theory has significant holes. Today, the Eilean Mor Lighthouse is fully automated. There are no longer keepers to watch the horizon or write in diaries about ghost storms. The beam of light continues to rotate, cutting through the mist and alerting ships to the dangers hidden beneath the waves. But the mystery of the three men remains etched into the stones of the island. Occasional visitors and maintenance technicians report an uncomfortable stillness that seems to envelop the place, a silence that is not just the absence of sound, but the presence of an unfinished story. The case of Eilean Mor has become the gold standard of maritime mysteries because it confronts us with the fragility of our presence before the vastness of nature. It reminds us that, despite our technology and our need to explain everything through logic, there are moments and places where the rules of our world seem to be suspended, leaving only emptiness and the eternal curiosity of those who seek to understand what happens when a man's light goes out forever. The true face of what occurred on that December night will likely never be revealed, remaining as one of history's great cold cases. James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur have become part of folklore, shadows that inhabit the boundary between historical fact and urban legend. As we study the archives of the Northern Lighthouse Board, we realize that the Eilean Mor tragedy changed safety protocols forever, ensuring that no man was ever left alone in such extreme circumstances again. However, the price of that lesson was the lives of three souls who vanished into the thin air of Scotland. As long as the Atlantic continues to crash against the cliffs of the Flannan Isles, the question will continue to echo for those brave enough to listen. What could be so terrible as to make three men disappear from a locked island? Perhaps the mystery is its own purpose, keeping alive the memory that the sea, in its infinite wisdom, knows how to keep its own dead. If you felt drawn to this enigma, consider subscribing to explore the next shadows of our history.